He walked in on purpose. That's the part you need to understand before anything else. Every other person who entered Auschwitz did so against their will, dragged from their homes, packed into cattle cars, stripped of their names and given numbers. They went because they had no choice. Witold Pilecki had a choice. He had a wife. He had 2 children. He had a safe position in the Polish underground resistance. He could have fought the war from the shadows of Warsaw, like thousands of other resistance fighters, and never gone near that place. Instead, on September 19, 1940, he walked into a German roundup on a street in Warsaw, put his hands up, and let himself be arrested. He had a fake identity card in his pocket and a mission in his head. Get into Auschwitz, find out what the Germans were doing inside, build a resistance network among the prisoners, and smuggle the truth out to the world. He spent 947 days inside. The intended lifespan of an Auschwitz prisoner was 42 days. Witold Pilecki survived 947. He built a secret army inside the camp. He smuggled intelligence to the Allies that became the first comprehensive account of the Holocaust. He documented the gas chambers, the mass executions, the medical experiments, the systematic extermination of human beings on an industrial scale. And when his reports reached the outside world, nobody believed him. Then, after nearly 3 years, he escaped. He ran through the darkness with bullets cracking behind him, reached Warsaw, wrote a 100-page report detailing everything he had seen, and the people who were supposed to help told him the information was too extreme to be credible. And then, after surviving all of that, the people who liberated his country put him against a wall and shot him in the back of the head. His name was Witold Pilecki, and this might be the most important story of the Second World War that you've never heard. Witold Pilecki was born on May 13, 1901, in the Russian Empire near the Finnish border. His family was Polish. That mattered. In the early 20th century, Poland didn't exist on any map. It had been carved up between Russia, Germany, and Austria more than a century earlier. Being Polish meant carrying a country inside your chest that didn't exist anywhere else. Pilecki grew up with that fire. As a teenager, he joined the Polish Scouts, an underground scouting movement that doubled as resistance training for Polish youth. When Poland finally regained its independence in 1918, he joined the army. He fought in the Polish-Soviet War of 1919 to 1921 and was decorated twice for bravery. After the war, he settled down. He married a schoolteacher named Maria. They had 2 children, a son, Andrzej, and a daughter, Zofia. He farmed. He managed an estate. He was quiet, devout, and unremarkable in every way that mattered to anyone who didn't know what was coming. On September 1st, 1939, Nazi Germany invaded Poland. 17 days later, the Soviet Union invaded from the east. Poland was crushed between 2 of the most brutal regimes in human history in less than a month. Pilecki fought. His cavalry regiment was shattered by the advancing Germans, but he kept fighting with scattered units until there was nothing left to fight with. When the formal resistance collapsed, he didn't go home. He went underground. In November 1939, Pilecki co-founded the Secret Polish Army, one of the earliest resistance organizations in occupied Europe. He had already given up the quiet life. He had already left his wife and children behind. What came next would take him further from them than either of them could have imagined. By the summer of 1940, rumors were reaching Warsaw about a place called Auschwitz. The Germans had converted a former Polish army barracks into a concentration camp, and Polish political prisoners were being sent there in growing numbers. Telegrams were arriving at families' doors, informing them of their loved ones' deaths. Nobody knew what was happening inside. The Polish resistance needed someone on the ground. Witold Pilecki volunteered. He presented his plan to his commanding officer. He would get himself arrested in a German street roundup, be transported to Auschwitz under a false identity, and once inside, he would organize a resistance network, document what the Germans were doing, and smuggle intelligence out of the camp to the Allies. His commanding officer approved the plan. They gave Pilecki a fake identity card in the name of Tomasz Serafiński. On September 19, 1940, Pilecki kissed his wife, said goodbye to his children, walked into a neighborhood where the Germans were conducting a mass arrest of civilians, and put his hands in the air. He was beaten with rubber truncheons for 2 days. Then, he was loaded onto a transport with nearly 2,000 other prisoners and shipped to Auschwitz. He was registered as prisoner number 4859. What Pilecki found inside Auschwitz was worse than anything the resistance had imagined. In 1940, the camp was still primarily holding Polish political prisoners and military officers. But even then, the brutality was systematic and constant. Prisoners were beaten for looking at a guard. They were shot for moving too slowly. They were worked until their bodies broke, and then killed for being unable to work. And it was getting worse. Pilecki watched Auschwitz transform. What had started as a political prison was becoming something else, something the world had never seen. The transports grew larger. The categories of prisoner expanded. Jews began arriving in numbers that dwarfed everything before. The gas chambers were built. The crematoria went operational. The selection process, where SS doctors decided with a wave of their hand who would live and who would die that day, became routine. Pilecki documented all of it. He built a secret organization inside the camp called the ZOW. He recruited members carefully, men he could trust, men who hadn't been broken, men who still had enough fire left to resist. The ZOW smuggled food, clothing, and medicine to prisoners. They boosted morale. They gathered intelligence. And they built a radio transmitter from stolen parts and broadcast information out of Auschwitz to the Polish resistance in Warsaw. His reports were among the first accounts of the Holocaust to reach the Western Allies. They described the gas chambers. They described the medical experiments. They described the systematic murder of tens of thousands of human beings. They included numbers, methods, names, dates. The Allies received the reports, and they did nothing. The information was considered too extreme to be credible. The idea that a modern European government was operating industrial death factories was beyond what the Allied leadership was willing to believe. Pilecki's intelligence, gathered at the cost of nearly 3 years of his life inside the worst place on Earth, was filed away and ignored. By the spring of 1943, the situation inside Auschwitz had changed. The original Polish political prisoners were being transferred to other camps to make room for the Jewish transports arriving from across occupied Europe. Pilecki's network was being dismantled. Key members of the ZOW had been discovered and executed by the camp's Gestapo. His own exposure was becoming inevitable. He had spent 947 days inside Auschwitz. He had outlived the intended prisoner lifespan by more than 20 times over. He had survived beatings, starvation, disease, forced labor, and the constant knowledge that any day could be his last. He decided to escape, not to save himself, but because he believed he could convince the resistance leadership in person to mount an attack on the camp from outside. He believed that if he could stand in front of them and tell them what he had seen with his own eyes, they would have to act. On the night of April 26, 1943, Pilecki and two fellow prisoners, Jan Redze and Edward Ciesielski, were working the night shift at a bakery outside the camp's main perimeter. They had spent weeks preparing. They had a duplicate key. They knew the guard rotations. They knew the phone lines they needed to cut. They cut the wires. They forced open the iron door. They overpowered a guard. And they ran. Shots were fired behind us, Pilecki wrote later. How fast we were running. It is hard to describe. We were tearing the air into rags by quick movements of our hands. They ran all night. They ran all the next day. They covered 100 kilometers on foot before they could rest. It took them a week to reach safety. Witold Pilecki was out. After nearly 3 years, he was free. In August 1943, Pilecki reached Warsaw. He went directly to the headquarters of the Home Army, the main Polish resistance organization, and presented his report. 100 pages. Everything he had seen. Everything that was happening inside Auschwitz. The gas chambers, the selections, the crematoria burning 8,000 bodies a day. The systematic extermination of an entire people. The Home Army leadership listened, and then they told him no. No assault on the camp, no rescue mission, no action. The Allies wouldn't support it. The resources weren't available. The reports were considered exaggerated. Pilecki had spent nearly 3 years inside a death camp, built a spy network from nothing, smuggled intelligence at the risk of his life, escaped through a hail of bullets, and walked 100 kilometers to deliver the truth in person. And nobody was willing to act on it. But Witold Pilecki was not a man who stopped fighting. When the Warsaw Uprising erupted in August 1944, the Polish resistance's desperate attempt to liberate their capital from the Germans before the Soviet army arrived, Pilecki was there. He fought in the streets. He helped hold one of the city's main thoroughfares against German counterattacks. The uprising failed. The Germans crushed it in 63 days. 200,000 Polish civilians were killed. Pilecki was captured and sent to a German prisoner of war camp in Bavaria. He was liberated by the Americans in April 1945. He was free. He was safe. He could have stayed in the West. He could have gone to Britain, to America, to anywhere that wasn't Poland. He went back to Poland. Because Poland wasn't free. The Nazis were gone, but the Soviets had taken their place. A communist government controlled by Moscow now ruled the country, and the men and women who had fought in the resistance, the people who had risked everything to free Poland from one tyrant, were now being hunted as enemies of the new one. Pilecki went back to gather intelligence on the communist regime. He was doing what he had always done, walking into danger because someone had to. On May 8, 1947, the Polish Communist Secret Police arrested him. They tortured him for months. They ripped out his fingernails. They broke his ribs. They broke his nose. They tried to make him confess to crimes he hadn't committed: espionage, conspiracy, planning assassinations. A priest who was imprisoned alongside him was the last to see him before the end. He described Pilecki being led away for execution with a white bandage tied over his mouth. Pilecki's alleged last words were, "I've been trying to live my life so that in the hour of my death I would feel joy rather than fear." On May 25, 1948, Witold Pilecki was executed in Mokotów prison in Warsaw. A single bullet to the back of the head. He was 47 years old. His body was dumped in an unmarked grave. For over 40 years under communist rule, his name was erased from Polish history. His family was forbidden from speaking about him. His children grew up in a country that pretended their father had never existed. In 1990, after the fall of communism in Poland, Witold Pilecki was officially rehabilitated. The charges were declared false. His rank was restored. His story was finally told. Today, he is one of the most celebrated heroes in Polish history. There are statues of him, streets named after him. His report, the 100-page document that nobody believed, is considered one of the most important primary sources of the Holocaust. But the thing that stays with you isn't the statues or the streets or the historical recognition. It's the choice. A man with a wife and 2 children standing on a street in Warsaw in September 1940, looking at a line of German soldiers rounding up civilians and walking toward them on purpose, knowing exactly where they would send him, knowing what he would find there, knowing that every day inside that place would be a day he might not survive. 947 days. Prisoner 4859. He walked in because someone had to know the truth. He was killed because the truth was inconvenient. And for 40 years, the world forgot he had ever lived.